The sun beat down without mercy on those rolling hills beside the Little Bighorn River in late June of 1876. The air tasted of dust and gunpowder, thick enough to chew. Hooves thundered across the dry grass, rifles cracked like whips, and the sharp, piercing yells of warriors cut through the chaos like knives. For more than 150 years, we've been fed a clean, almost romantic version of what unfolded there. George Armstrong Custer, the golden-haired boy general standing firm on a lonely ridge with his revolver blazing, his men in a tight, defiant circle, holding off wave after wave until the last bullet was spent and the last breath drawn. Textbooks called it a noble tragedy. Paintings turned it into a frozen tableau of heroism. Movies like the old Errol Flynn epics made it look choreographed, almost beautiful in its inevitability. But that story, the one drilled into generations of school kids and barroom legends, doesn't hold up when you listen to the people who actually lived through those hours. Not the officers writing reports days later, not the widows shaping memoirs decades on. The real voices, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho men and women who were there fighting for their families, paint something rawer, uglier, and far more human. A collapse, a desperate scramble, a command that unraveled under its own weight. Those final hours weren't a stand at all. They were a rout wrapped in panic, where overconfidence met unbreakable determination, and the ground itself swallowed the difference. The official record buried the mess because it had to. America needed a martyr to fuel the next round of expansion, not a cautionary tale about hubris. But the battlefield doesn't forget. Spent shells still lie where they fell. Bone fragments whisper of close-range shots and hand-to-hand frenzy. And the pictographs and spoken memories passed down through families line up with every new dig in ways that make the old narrative crack wide open. What really happened in Custer's last hours was a story of men pushed to the edge, decisions made in heat and haste, and a people who refused to roll over and disappear. It's time to let the dust settle and look at what the evidence actually shows without the varnish. George Armstrong Custer didn't arrive on that ridge as some flawless military genius. He was born in 1839 in a small Ohio farming town called New Rumley, the son of a blacksmith and a woman who named him after a preacher she admired. Folks called him Audie as a boy, because that's how he mangled his own middle name. He was loud, restless, ambitious. The kind of kid who charmed his way through trouble more often than he earned his keep. Part of his youth he spent in Monroe, Michigan, with a half-sister, soaking up the Midwest values of hard work and bigger dreams. He taught school for a bit, but the classroom couldn't hold him. West Point accepted him in 1857, and he scraped through dead last in his class of 34, racking up demerits for pranks and tardiness like they were medals. The Civil War saved him from obscurity. Barely out of the academy, he charged into the First Battle of Bull Run and caught the eye of generals who liked his reckless energy. By 23, he was a brevet brigadier general, leading the Michigan Cavalry Brigade in flowing hair and a custom uniform that made him look like he stepped out of a dime novel. Gettysburg, Yellow Tavern, the final chase after Lee at Appomattox, he earned a reputation for bold charges that sometimes bordered on suicidal, but they worked when the odds were kind. His men called him lucky. His superiors tolerated the ego because results came with it. Peace didn't suit him the same way. After the war, he dropped to captain, then lieutenant colonel in the new 7th Cavalry. Frontier duty meant chasing scattered bands, enforcing treaties that Washington kept rewriting. He hunted buffalo with the same flair he'd once used on Confederates, wrote best-selling books about his adventures, and cultivated a public image complete with that trademark buckskin jacket and long curls that made Eastern newspapers swoon. His wife, Libby, Elizabeth Bacon, the judge's daughter he'd married in 1864 after a whirlwind courtship, worshipped him. She followed him to dusty posts, endured the separations, and later spent the rest of her long life polishing every rough edge of his legend. But Custer had flaws that no memoir could fully hide. He was court-martialed once for going AOL to see her. He tangled in scandals over supply contracts and political feuds during the Grant administration. He underestimated native fighters repeatedly, seeing them as obstacles rather than nations with their own strategies and grievances. By 1876, at 36, he was still chasing glory, still convinced that boldness trumped caution every time. The broader forces pulling everyone toward the Little Bighorn that summer ran deeper than one man's ambition. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 had promised the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho the Black Hills, Pahasapa, sacred ground, as their own, along with hunting rights across vast plains. No white settlement allowed. Then gold turned up in those hills in 1874. Custer himself led the expedition that confirmed it, riding in with scientists and reporters, practically advertising the find. Miners poured in by the thousands. The government, embarrassed by its own treaty, issued an ultimatum. All Indians had to report to reservations by January 1876 or be considered hostile. Most couldn't or wouldn't comply, especially the bands following Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse who valued their freedom above government rations. Winter camps turned into spring gatherings as word spread. By June, thousands had converged along the Greasy grass, as the Lakota called the Little Bighorn. Estimates put the village at 6,000 to 7,000 people, maybe 1,500 to 2,000 fighting men. It wasn't a war party, it was families. Elders telling stories, children playing, women tending lodges and pony herds that stretched for miles. They came to hunt, to dance, to live unmolested one more season. Sitting Bull, the hunk papa leader in his mid-40s, had a vision during the Sundance that spring. He saw soldiers tumbling into camp upside down, like grasshoppers falling from the sky. It wasn't mystical prophecy, so much as a clear warning rooted in experience. The people took it as a sign their stand would hold. Crazy Horse, the Oglala war leader, moved with quiet intensity, respected for his bravery and his refusal to sign away land. Gall, the hunk papa chief, carried fresh grief after Reno's opening attack killed his wives and children. These weren't faceless enemies, they were men with families, histories, and a determination sharpened by decades of broken promises. Custer's column left Fort Abraham Lincoln in May as part of a larger campaign under General Alfred Terry. The plan was coordination, Terry and Colonel Gibbon coming from the east and north, Custer's 7th as the fast hammer to drive the villages into them. But Custer, itching for independent glory, pushed ahead hard. He left behind the Gatling guns because they slowed the march. His Crow and Arakawa scouts, men like Bloody Knife, who'd grown up among the Sioux and knew their ways, warned him the camp was enormous. One scout reportedly said it would take a week to ride around it. Custer brushed it aside. "We've got enough to whip anything that rides," he supposedly told them. On June 24th, his scouts spotted the massive pony herd. Instead of waiting for Terry or confirming numbers, he ordered an immediate attack. The next morning, June 25th, he split his roughly 650 men into 3 battalions. Major Marcus Reno took 3 companies south to hit the lower end of the village. Captain Frederick Benteen led 3 more west to scout for escape routes and block retreat. Custer kept 5 companies, about 210 men, including his brothers Tom and Boston, nephew Audie Reed, and brother-in-law James Calhoun, for the main thrust along the ridges to the north. Reno crossed the river first, around noon. Bugles blared, horses charged into the lower lodges. Warriors grabbed whatever weapons were at hand, rifles, bows, lances, and poured out. Women scooped up children and ran for ravines. Reno's men dismounted, formed a skirmish line, but the volume of fire and sheer numbers forced them back across the river in disorder. They scrambled onto a bluff, dug in, and held under siege. Benteen, finding nothing to the south, received Custer's scribbled note, "Big village, be quick, bring packs." He joined Reno, but by then Custer was committed elsewhere. Now the story shifts to the ridge where everything unraveled. Custer's men moved down Medicine Tail Coulee, a dry wash aiming toward the river. Native accounts differ on exactly how far they got, but most agree they never crossed in force to strike the heart of the camp. Cheyenne fighters like Buffalo Calf Road woman rallied early. Some say she knocked a buckskin-clad officer from his horse with a club or lance. Warriors on fast ponies began circling, firing from cover. The soldiers pushed north along the bluffs, trying to find a vantage, but the response was already overwhelming. Red Horse, a Minneconjou Lakota chief who fought that day and later drew detailed pictographs for the Smithsonian in 1881, left one of the clearest records. He described the camp layout: Hunkpapas highest up the river under a bluff, then Santees, Oglas, Brules, and others strung along. The day of the attack, I and 4 women were a short distance from the camp digging wild turnips, he recalled. Suddenly, one of the women attracted my attention to a cloud of dust rising a short distance from camp. I soon saw that the soldiers were charging the camp. He ran back, joined the council briefly. Then the fighting erupted. After driving Reno's men back, the warriors turned on the different soldiers, Custer's group. These different soldiers discharged their guns but little, Red Horse said. The soldiers became foolish, many throwing away their guns and raising their hands, saying, "Sioux, pity us, take us prisoners." The Sioux did not take a single soldier prisoner, but killed all of them. None were left alive for even a few minutes. Two Moon, the northern Cheyenne chief who was 34 and fought both Reno and Custer, gave an interview years later that captured the whirlwind. He had ridden into camp warning people not to run. "I am Two Moon, your chief. Don't run away. Stay here and fight. You must stay and fight the white soldiers. I shall stay even if I am to be killed." He saw Custer's men forming lines, bugles sounding, soldiers dismounting. The Indians swirled around them like water round a stone. Warriors used repeaters, Winchesters, Henrys, while the soldiers relied on single-shot Springfields. Two Moons watched the soldiers make several stands, each one crumbling. At last, about 100 men and 5 horsemen stood on the hill all bunched together, he said. Then a chief was killed, and then 5 horsemen and the bunch of men, maybe so 40, started toward the river. The man on the sorrel horse leading that desperate breakout fought bravely with a big knife, but the circle closed. Dust and smoke turned the field into a haze where every shot found a mark. Gall's fury fueled much of the northern fight. Reno's initial charge had killed his 2 wives and 3 children. "It made my heart bad," he later told interviewers. "After that, I killed all my enemies with the hatchet." He led charges that broke company cohesion, using captured carbines alongside his own weapons. Crazy Horse coordinated from the ridges, exploiting every draw and coulee for cover. Standing Bear, a young Lakota warrior of 17, remembered the frenzy in a letter dictated decades later. "Then I heard a man shouting that the soldiers were coming. They had shot a boy that was on his way to get our horses. I ran back and saw that another man was bringing our horses. I sprang onto a horse, but I didn't have time to dress. I had only my shirt, but no shoes." He rode half-naked toward the sound of guns, joining hundreds pouring in from every direction. Custer himself? The accounts swirl in the dust. Some Lakota oral histories say he was wounded early, perhaps in the chest, and took a temple shot, his own or a comrade's, to avoid capture. Others credit specific warriors. White Cow Bull claimed a shot in the river. Pretty Shield, wife of a Crow scout, said he died in the water at the hands of a Lakota called Big Nose. Gall insisted Custer never reached the ford in strength. No bodies or horses supported a crossing. His final spot was on the ridge, now called Custer Hill, where about 40 men and a few horses made a last cluster. Archaeology found minimal evidence of a prolonged stand. No massive breastworks of dead horses held long. Custer's body was discovered 2 days later by Terry's relief column, relatively intact compared to others. 2 wounds, no scalping, no grotesque mutilation. Perhaps the warriors didn't recognize him immediately amid the chaos, or perhaps a strange respect lingered for the fight he gave. His brothers Tom and Boston lay nearby, along with other relatives. The buglers sounded calls to the end. When the shooting stopped, the warriors didn't linger in celebration. They had defended their homes. Red Horse took guns and belts from the dead, many with full ammunition still in them. Bodies were stripped in the traditional way, some mutilated to count coup or ensure spirits wouldn't return. But the focus quickly shifted back to protecting the village. Reno and Benteen held their bluff overnight, hearing distant fire but unable to break through. The next day, the warriors slipped away as Terry approached. Relief troops on June 27th found horror. 210 bodies scattered across the ridges, bloating in the June heat, scavenged by animals. Quick, shallow burials followed. Markers placed years later didn't always match actual death sites. Grass fires and modern excavations in the 1980s and beyond revealed more. Scott's work showed organized resistance in spots, but clear signs of collapse elsewhere. Wild firing patterns, hasty retreats, wounds from point-blank range. The immediate army reports focused on heroism to rally support for continued campaigns. The press, hungry for drama after the nation's centennial celebrations turned sour, amplified it. Libby Custer's books, Boots and Saddles, and others turned every flaw into virtue, every defeat into destiny. Frederick Whitaker's quick biography, fed by her letters, cemented the martyr image. Paintings like Anheuser-Busch's famous Custer's Last Fight hung in saloons across the country, showing a defiant circle against impossible odds. Hollywood picked it up. Silent Shorts in 1912, the 1941 Errol Flynn vehicle They Died with Their Boots On that glossed over mistakes and made Custer a tragic romantic lead. Each retelling served the moment. Post-Civil War reconciliation, westward expansion justification, even World War II patriotism. Native accounts, collected in interviews and pictographs, sat in archives or were dismissed as unreliable exaggerations from the vanquished. Red Horse's drawings gathered dust for a century. Two Moon's words to Hamlin Garland in 1898 described swirling chaos that didn't fit the tableau. Standing Bear's letter, only recently highlighted, humanized the defense. Half-dressed warriors rushing to save their children after a boy was shot riding for the pony herd. Archaeology changed everything. Scott's teams didn't just find bullets, they mapped a story. Cartridge distributions proved warriors used the terrain, coulees, ridges, draws for enfilading fire. Soldiers fought from the high ground as trained, but numbers and mobility overwhelmed them. No evidence supported mass suicide. Head wounds came from enemy fire, or in a few cases, possible assisted mercy. The variety of Indian firearms showed trade networks and captures had armed them well, but coordination mattered more than technology. The battlefield today, preserved as a national monument, holds markers for both sides. A mass grave for unknowns. An Indian memorial added in 2003 honors the warriors who protected their people. Walk the ridges at dawn, and the wind carries more than grass. It carries questions. Why did Custer split his force? Why ignore the scouts? Why leave the Gatlings? Hubris, yes, but also a belief that native resistance was crumbling, that one bold strike would end it. What happened in those final hours matters because the myth once justified conquest. It reduced complex nations to obstacles, brave soldiers to footnotes in a larger march of progress. The human cost cut both ways. 210 men dead following flawed orders. Families in the village terrified for their children, a way of life under siege. The truth doesn't erase courage on either side. The troopers who charged into unknown odds showed grit, even if leadership failed them. The warriors circling that hill fought for survival with everything they had left. Archaeology and oral histories now let us see the messy reality, not a glorious last stand, but a brutal clash where arrogance met resolve, and the river ran red for a reason. The dust has long settled along the Little Bighorn, but the questions refuse to stay buried. History recorded what it needed to believe. The ground and the voices that survived tell us something else entirely. A story of overreach, of defense, of lives cut short in the heat of a single afternoon. Maybe that's the real legacy, not the legend on the hill, but the complicated, painful truth beneath it. A reminder that every battlefield holds more than one story, and the ones we choose to remember shape who we become. In the end, Custer's final hours weren't about glory or savagery. They were about people, flawed, frightened, fierce, caught in a collision that changed everything and nothing at all. The wind still whispers it across those hills if you stop long enough to listen.